Hello, and welcome to another Sinister Sunday. In light of Luna New Year's, I decided to tell you one more New Year's folktale for 2025. This is the folktale called The Old Belfry. Let's get into it. The old belfry stood apart from the church, an octagon-shaped building terminating in a squat. It contained only two rooms. The room which occupied the whole of the ground floor was used as a lumber room, and the room above was known as the rope room. A similarly winding stair ran from the ground floor to a vault-like chamber below. The older generation of bell ringers had firmly believed the belfry to be haunted. No one had actually claimed to have seen the ghost, but when the subject was mentioned to one of them, he would look wise and shake his head with an expression that was meant to convey an idea that he knew something about it, but wouldn't tell. There was one man who could definitely have told us something about it if he wished. He recently taken leave of his senses and was no longer active in their circle. None of the old bell ringers would have ventured alone into the building after dark. Not one of them have ever ventured down the winding stairs that led to the vault below. Some of them may have been curious to know what it contained, or whether it contained anything, but their superstition overcame their curiosity. The younger men, who had supplanted the older generation of bell ringers, laughed at the superstition of their predecessors. Still, not one of them displayed any curiosity to explore the recesses of the old building. The newer generation spent most of their time in the rope room and were apparently quite oblivious to the chamber underneath the building. The belfry was an eerie, dismal old place even in the daytime. To those who understood such things, it was an ideal place for a ghost's habitation. The exterior presented age-stained, weather-scarred walls, while the interior was cheerless, barren, and uninviting. There were long, narrow, stained-glassed windows on the ground floor and in the rope room, but the glass was covered with dust, and the sun rays that succeeded in filtering through the dust-covered figures of saints hardly disperse the gloom of the place. One New Year's Eve at 11 o'clock, a merry party of young men, all more or less campanologists, were seated on benches around the walls of the rope room in the old belfry. They had taken part in a wild, unrestrained mob who paraded the city streets, making the night unbearable with blasts from tin trumpets and shrieking whistles, and indulging in rough horseplay. Most inebriated, they were waiting to usher in the new year with merry peals from the bell. As they passed a wine bottle around, they sang songs for the parting year and laughed at what they thought to be the quaint humor of it. Though young in years, these men were experienced ropers, and their alcohol seemed to have taken little effect on them. One of these merry company ropers, John Greaves, who was younger and less experienced than his companions, had mixed his drinks unwisely before coming to the belfry. Consequently, he was very inebriated and in a state of half-stupid. Unbeknownst to the others, he took a candle, left the rope room, and staggered down the winding stairs. When he reached the ground floor, he struck a match, lit the candle, and muttering incoherently to himself, sought the steps that led to the vault below. His muddled brain had conceived the idea of doing what he would never have thought doing in his sober state, even in the broad daylight. He stumbled down the steps and reached a small landing, pushing open a heavy door which creaked on its rusty hinges. He entered the vault. The place was empty. It was a square cell with a flagged floor. The walls were dry but covered with a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, but the floor appeared to have recently been swept. Although the night was mild, the place exuding a musty, earthy smell and seemed to be as cold as death. John uttered an insane laugh, muttered something to himself, and was about to return to his companions when a sudden draught of ice-cold air extinguished his candle. He took a step forward, his toe caught in something, and he stumbled and fell. After several vain attempts to rise and much incoherent flailing, he snuggled in close to the cold, dusty stone wall and fell asleep. And then, supposedly, he had a dream. He sat in the vault in the inky darkness. Why was he there? Or how he came there, he did not know. Heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs, and two monks in black habits and crawls entered the chamber. One of them carried a lantern and stood near the door. They did not appear to notice Greaves, and he cowered closer to the wall, out of the reach of the rays of the lantern. The monk advanced to the center of the floor, and pushing an iron bar through one of the large flags, lifted it and disclosed a square hole. Quaking with fear, John watched with fascinated eyes. The monks descended through the opening in the pavement, and he can hear them descending a ladder. He sat still for several moments, wondering what was going to happen next. He could hear the murmur of voices, but could not distinguish the words. The voices stopped, then came a thud of a pick, followed by the unmistakable sound of a shovel throwing up earth. Impelled by an irresistible curiosity which overcame his fear, John crawled to the opening and peered below. He saw one of the monks digging a hole in the soft ground floor of what appeared to be a cellar. By the feeble light of the lantern, the other monk examined an emaciated, ghastly face of a corpse clad in a monk's habit. Fearing they might look up and see him, John Greaves crept back and cowered against the wall. After a time, John heard the monks, in a clear, distinct voice, praying a burial service over the corpse, over their dead brother. After the prayers, the shovel sound started again as they filled the grave. The clang of the bells when the midnight hour struck failed to wake John. John woke, and he had a vague consciousness that something very cold and damp had brushed his face. He rubbed his eyes and stretched himself out. It took him a few seconds before he realized where he was, but he didn't know how he got there. He fumbled in his pocket, found a match, lit it, and recovered his candle. His dream then came back vividly to his mind. He examined the flags and tried to find the chamber, but he couldn't find a trace of an iron ring. He was fully sober now and full of apprehension, but he could not withdraw his eyes from the floor. It was then a flag in the center of the room began to rise, inch by inch, with unfaltering and terrifying progress. Finally, it assumed the perpendicular and then fell back, making no sound, and disclosed the square opening. A monk clad in black, earth-stained habit and crawl slowly emerged from the aperture. His parchment-like skin was drawn tight over the bones of his fleshless face. He carried a wooden crucifix in his hands, and his eyes glowed strangely and sunk deep in their hollow orbits. His white lips, drawn over his teeth, moved, but no sound came out. John knew he was praying. He went to the door and passed John. John, fascinated, involuntarily followed him. The monk slowly went up the winding stone stairs, passed across the room on the ground floor, and ascended the steps to the rope room. He went straight to the rope that hung from the tenor bell. He placed the crucifix carefully in his pocket and, taking hold of the rope, pulled it. John, with bulging eyes and mouth agape, watched the slack of the rope glide up and down through the hole in the wooden ceiling. But no sound followed. The big bell did not ring. After an interval of several seconds, the monk pulled on the rope again. He was ringing the passing bell, ringing it for himself, but no sound came from the bell above. John Greaves did not wait to see any more. He ran down the stone steps, and finding the door leading to the street ajar, he rushed out and slammed it after him. He never ran faster in his life than he ran from the Belfry to his home on that New Year's morning. John could never be induced to go near the place afterward, not even in the daytime. A week later, a priest was surprised to receive an envelope containing 2 sovereigns and a note requesting him to say masses for the repose of the soul of an unknown monk. John Greaves kept what he had seen a close secret until some years after, when near the church, he passed a procession of monks. The monks walked the procession with their heads bowed down. Then the last man had straightened up his neck to reveal his face. John was taken aback. The face he revealed was a familiar one. That very same day, the Belfry was destroyed by a fire. Thank you so much for watching another Sinister Sunday. If you like this content, check out our Sinister Sunday playlist for more. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing. We'll see you on the next one.